ओमज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रस्थाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Thank you all so much, dear family. I seek all of your blessings as I'm going to venture into something that I've never done before. I've never given a class sharing two parallel lives. I wanted to share two lives of devotion today, two lives separated by approximately 450 years, two lives who dedicated their lives in experiencing the love of Krishna, and two lives who were purified by advanced souls such as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada. Two lives who were adventurous, two lives which were simple, and lastly, two lives which were humble to attract the miracles of Krishna. So, why did I pick Gopal Bhatta Goswami and George Harrison? I could have picked so many other people. For example, I could have chosen two lives from our contemporary world, like Gauranga Prabhu, who, similar to Gopal Bhatta Goswami, is renounced, he's devoted, he's an amazing leader, he's an author, he's a mentor, and he's a guide. On the other hand, I could have chosen Sundar Pichai. He is the, as you all know, the CEO of Google. And just like George Harrison during his time, he also has hit the peak of the material wall. These are two souls who are simple, who graduated from the same college in the same year, by the way, but have taken two totally different paths. But I chose Gopal Bhatta Goswami and George Harrison as I have both their biographies with me, incomplete, and hence share more completely about their lives. Whatever I'm going to speak today is taken from three books. Here Comes the Sun by Yogeshwar Prabhu on the life of George Harrison. The Six Goswamis of Vrindavan by Satyaraj Prabhu. Bhakti Ratnakar by Neelambar Chakravarti. And some lectures of His Holiness Radhanath Swami on George Harrison. So let's begin. So first, let's look at the differences between Gopal Bhatta Goswami and George Harrison. So it's easy to find differences when there is a huge age difference or huge number of years between them. As I was mentioning, there's a gap of 450 years between when Gopal Bhatta Goswami was born in 1503, and George Harrison, who was born in 1943. Now, first let's look at their parents, who played a big role in their material and spiritual successes. So Gopal's father was Venkata Bhatta, who was the priest of the Srirangam temple. What a birth, you might think. Birth in a Brahmin family. More importantly, birth in the family of Sri Vaishnavas. Birth in the family where his Krishna consciousness was guaranteed. In such births, is there nothing one needs to do? We will see that even in his life, he had many obstacles, although they were subtle, that he had to overcome. On the other hand, let's look at George Harrison's parents. So George Harrison's parents, his father was Harold Harrison, and he was actually a bus driver very poor circumstances he was born in. And they were struggling to make ends meet. His mother, Louise, had to care for 4 children. She would do odd jobs just to make ends meet. Even though they were born in different eras, in different countries, in different circumstances, we always talk about time, place, and circumstances. These two souls were completely born in different desha, kala, and patra, different time, different place, and different circumstance. But yet, they had many similarities, which I'm going to discuss today. So the first thing is Gopal Bhatta Goswami met Lord Chaitanya in 1510 when he was only 7 years old in Sri Rangam. On the other hand, George Harrison first met Srila Prabhupada in 1969. Okay, so now let's look at some more similarities before we dive deep into their uh, pastimes. So, first similarity is that they both served Lord Chaitanya's mission in a big way. We'll discuss that in more detail. The second thing is that both of them were extremely humble. So when Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami asked Gopal Bhatta Goswami for his blessings before writing the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, with all humility, said that he will only bless him if his name is not mentioned in the book. He was that humble. George Harrison also was extremely humble. Out of the 4 Beatles, he was considered to be the most quiet and the most humble. We will discuss that also as we discuss their lives. The next thing is, it's not that just because Gopal was born in a devotee family, he did not have any obstacles. He, as well as George, faced several obstacles on their paths. We will see how they overcame these paths, these difficulties. Both felt and saw the loving hand of Krishna in their lives in amazing ways. I'll try to describe a few pastimes where this happened. And both put in a lot of effort and endeavor to understand Krishna, to understand Krishna. So it is said, Tivrena Bhakti Yogena, one must put in a lot of effort in order to progress on this path. We will discuss that as well. And both had adventurous journeys. So these are some similarities. So now let's look at, before we dive deeper into their lives, let's pause for a second. Let's draw a line between these two great souls. It is almost impossible for any of us on this call to be close to the purity of Gopal Bhatta Goswami or to achieve the material success of George Harrison. On this line, let's try to place where we are on our spiritual journeys. Are we close to Gopal Bhatta Goswami in terms of our spiritual desires? Or are we close to George Harrison in terms of our material ambitions? Or are we somewhere in between? We have material ambitions and we also want to progress spiritually. I will pause here if anyone wants to say anything on where they are on this line. Anybody? You can unmute and speak. Okay. Anybody? Srivachandra Prabhu, go ahead, please.
Right. Prabhu, maybe somewhere in the middle with more toward the material desires. I mean, there's no material success, but there are a lot of desires for such material success. But internally, there is some part of intelligence that says, no, I should only aspire for devotional service. So, but there is still a struggle. So, yeah, that is where I see myself.
Thank you so much, Srivas Chandra Prabhu, for your honest answer. Anyone else? I know someone else unmuted.
It was me, Prabhuji.
Go ahead.
Um, I mean, I would say that if this is like one line, this is like one axis. If we could draw another y-axis, we would be like quite below, like quite under this level, and somewhere in between, as Srivas Chandra Prabhu said. Like the magnitude of our devotion is not this much. Like the magnitude of devotion that George Harrison had is also quite big. So we might not have that much devotion, as well as we might not have that much material success as well. So yeah, somewhere in between, but quite low in magnitude, I would say.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu and Srivas Chandra Prabhu. So the good thing is, wherever we are on this line, and this is the most encouraging part, wherever we are on this line, the best thing is we still have hope. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy is available to any of us wherever we are on this journey. Okay, so we will experience the miracles. We can experience and feel Krishna's presence in our lives. We can experience so many wonderful things in our lives wherever we are. That's the beauty of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy. But there is something that we have to do if we have to access that mercy. And that's going to be the theme of today's discussion. So the theme is that devotion, or this life of devotion, is not easy for anyone, whether it's Srila Prabhupada, whether it's Srila Radhanath Swami, or whether it's someone like Draupadi. So both Gopal Bhatta Goswami and George Harrison both had to endeavor or strive in their lives of devotion. Both had to use Tivrena Bhakti. So Tivrena Bhakti means bhakti that is motivated by energy, that is motivated by endeavor, that is motivated by effort, and not necessarily motivated by purity. So, this is an important lesson for us. So, we should not let purity alone be our motivation. We should let the energy, the effort, the endeavor, Tivrena Bhakti, be our motivation. We can't get lazy or complacent in our paths. We have to keep pushing ourselves, as we see both in Gopal Bhatta Goswami's life, in George Harrison's life, and as we see in Srila Prabhupada's life also. In spite of meeting so many failures, he never stopped pushing himself. But you might ask, then what about purity, right? So purity will come with time. But if we are discouraged due to lack of purity at our level, we will not make much progress at all. So, the best times in our lives, the best spiritual moments in our lives are those moments where we have put in our effort. At least I can speak for myself. I can clearly remember the moments where I've really put in a lot of effort and I've felt Krishna's reciprocation, felt Krishna's love. So, if you look at, as I was saying, Draupadi, look at Srila Prabhupada, look at Radhanath Swami, and I just pause again for a second. Can any one of you share an experience where you pushed yourself and felt Krishna's reciprocation? Anybody like to share? That moment where you like really put in an effort and you felt Krishna's love.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhuji, please go ahead.
Prabhu, one thing I can recall is as a young boy, I did struggle with some desires, some type of desires. Difficult to speak about them here, but because of being with devotees, It did help me maintain some sanity of mind, and I pushed myself not to go in that direction, but rather uh, choose the path of Krishna consciousness. So, yeah, I did feel Krishna revealing some realizations, some things that, some wisdom that became a shelter for me later on, some realizations.
Nice. Thank you, Prabhu, for sharing that. So let's proceed. So before we proceed, I just want to quickly define bhakti. So what is bhakti? So we normally think that bhakti is when we desire to give everything to Krishna. Is that enough? Is just desiring to give everything to Krishna enough? Is that bhakti? The answer is yes and no. Krishna actually already has our results. So, in one sense, we cannot offer anything to Krishna because Krishna already has the results. For example, in Bhagavad Gita, 11th chapter, Krishna shows Arjuna that all his enemies are already destroyed. So, what can Arjuna offer? What can we offer? We can offer our deepest aspirations. Krishna is not looking for our achievements. We can offer our aspirations. Unfortunately, in this world, people look at our achievements. People look at our job, where we are working, how much money we make, what is our education, etc. Krishna does not look at our achievements at all. He only looks for our aspirations. So, in that context, we can do two things. One is dutiful detachment, as Arjuna did, and as the Bhagavad Gita stresses repeatedly, and grateful acceptance. This we can see in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the case of Prithu Maharaj, in the case of Prahlad Maharaj, and so on. Or we can see in the lives of saints who accepted everything that came on their paths as Krishna's mercy. Now, this is also bhakti. This grateful acceptance that everything is coming from Krishna is also bhakti. This dutiful detachment is also bhakti. Krishna sees and reciprocates with our aspirations. If you sincerely aspire for the highest truth, Krishna arranges so that you will get it in miraculous ways, as we see in the life of George Harrison. And that is what we'll see now and discuss. So, first, let's look at the childhood of both of these great souls. First, let's look at Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami's childhood. Now, as I mentioned previously, Gopal Bhatta Goswami's father was Venkata Bhatta, who was the authorized priest or pujari of the Srirangam temple. And this here, what you're seeing is the Srirangam temple. And Srirangam temple is actually the largest temple of Vishnu in all of India. Devotees all around India go and visit Srirangam to see Ranganatha, the deity of Narayan in the main sanctum. It is the center of Lakshmi Narayan, an expansion of the divine couple Radha and Krishna. The worship is more in the form of Aishwarya or the Aishwarya feature. The worship is more in the form of awe and reverence. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visited Sri Rangam, so here in this, the middle image that I've shown here, this is the path that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took during his South India travels. So he did visit Sri Rangam and he stayed in the home of Venkata Bhatta for 4 months during the rainy season. This was in 1510. And Gopal, as he was called then, was only 7 years old. He served Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He ate the remnants of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He heard from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He got to massage Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's legs, massage Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's feet. What a fortune. After those 4 months, When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was leaving, Gopal actually fainted. Gopal was in extreme mood of separation. At that point, he had a spiritual vision, a dream in which Lord Chaitanya revealed himself as Lord Krishna, as Sham Sundar. And in that same dream, he showed that he would serve under two jewels, Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami in Vrindavan. So immediately after this vision, Gopal wanted to leave home and go to Vrindavan, but he was stopped by his father and his uncles. So that is the childhood background of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Now let's look at the childhood of George Harrison. If Gopal Bhatta Goswami received the love of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, George Harrison received his mother's love. So, dear devotees, I just want to mention, let us never underestimate mother's love. So, in the Yaksha Prashna pastime between Yudhishthir Maharaj and Yamaraj, Yamaraj asks Yudhishthir Maharaj one question, and the question is, what is more heavier than earth? Does anybody know what the answer is? Yudhishthir Maharaj, without any hesitation, answers, mother's love. We tend to take this love for granted. It was George's mother who worked odd jobs just to help him buy a second-hand guitar that we see here that he's playing. So I will now read an excerpt about how she encouraged him to play, staying up late in the night. So this is an excerpt where George has just gotten his second-hand or used guitar, and he's twisting the guitar pegs until each string came as close as true as he could manage, positioning his fingers to his best effort. And he lost hope. He started saying, I'll never learn this. I'll never learn this. You will, son, Louise, his mother, encouraged. Just keep at it. She sat up with him until he quit, teary-eyed, at 2 a.m. in the morning. He looked at the toy instrument and said, You don't understand about guitars, do you, Mom? He said. No, she admitted. But if you stick to it, I'm sure you'll make it. So this was the kind of encouragement that George's mother gave him. So if mother's love was a silver lining, there are several obstacles also in George's life. He lacked interest in formal education. He lacked interest in manual labor also. In those days, the jobs of an electrician were very popular. He lacked complete interest in those things. And he lacked financial support also. So those were some of the obstacles in George's life. But what about Gopal's life? Did he have any obstacles? So let's see. So as I was mentioning, the obstacle that Gopal had to face was very subtle, but it occupied Gopal's childhood life. Sometimes subtle obstacles can be more difficult to overcome than gross obstacles. Now, he had been seeing the worship of Lakshmi Narayan in the mood of Aishwarya or majestic form. So during my childhood, or anyone who is brought up in South India or India in general, the worship is mostly in the form of awe and reverence. It is the worship which depicts Krishna's greatness. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not approve that completely. He mentioned that the Lord's Madhurya or loving feature is way higher than the Aishwarya feature. So this is the obstacle that Gopal was struggling with. So I'd like to share 3 examples where this is actually shown, where the worship of Aishwarya is subservient to Madhurya. So first, Let's look at an example from the Bhagavad Gita itself. So Arjuna says to Krishna, I wish to see your majestic form. I wish to see your Aishwarya Rupa. Krishna reveals it to Arjuna. After seeing this form, Arjuna trembles in fear. Overcome in grief that he might lose his friendship with Krishna, he requests Krishna in Bhagavad Gita 11:34, I believe, to return to his more like human-like form. This clearly shows that Madhurya feature is higher than the Aishwarya feature. Let's take another example, this time from the Bhagavatam. So when Mother Yashoda, suspecting Krishna of eating mud and looked into his mouth, she saw the entire universe. Her heart was seized with terror, and her natural motherly affection was replaced first by fear and then by awe and reverence. Thankfully, Krishna immediately made her forget it through the Yoga Maya potency. Again, here, this example also shows that Madhurya is higher than Aishwarya. The last example I want to share is from the gopis. During the Ras Leela, when Krishna disappears and the gopis are looking for him everywhere, Krishna takes his majestic form of Narayan. The gopis, seeing that form, offer obeisances, losing all the relationship they have towards him. It's so interesting that in each of these three cases, the only fear that they have is of losing that relationship that they have with Krishna. So thus, our little boy Gopal struggled. On one hand, he had his family worshipping the Aishwarya feature of the Lord. And on the other hand, after meeting Lord Chaitanya, his heart longed for Madhurya form. He decided to give up any kind of deity worship. So this became a big challenge later on. He decided then and there that I'm not going to do any deity worship ever. Okay, I'm just going to renounce everything, take the renounced order of life, and I'm not going to do any deity worship. And we will see how this manifested to be a struggle later on. So again, Krishna's sweetness is greater than Krishna's greatness. Okay, so Gopal, after he wanted to go to Vrindavan immediately, as I mentioned, but he waited, he served his parents until they passed away. After that, he rushed to Vrindavan. He received a lot of love from Rupa and Sanatan Goswamis, but he felt very much in separation from Lord Chaitanya. He then got another dream where he was asked to go to Nepal to take bath in the Gantaki river. In that dream that he had, it was mentioned that if he does this, he will feel Lord Chaitanya's presence. So accordingly, he went to the Gantaki river to take bath. In those days, they had to walk. So he walked all the way from Vrindavan to Nepal, right? So he went to Gantaki river to take a bath. And as he was taking bath, 12 Shilas, one after another, kept jumping onto his palms. Now, remember what he had just decided. He had decided not to do any deity worship. So, feeling unqualified to do any deity seva or deity service, he decided to drop them back into the river. The moment he put them back in water, they again kept coming back to him. And he tried to keep putting them back in the river, but they kept coming back again and again. He then heard a divine voice from the skies, also known as Akashvani. And then that voice said, I will remain with you in these Shilas. That was Lord Chaitanya speaking, saying that I will remain with you in these Shilas. Just worship me in these Shilas. He then received it as Gauranga Mahaprabhu's mercy and took the Shilas with him to Vrindavan to worship them. Now, worshipping Shilas is actually very simple. You just need three things. You need Yamuna water or Ganga water. You need Chandan, sandalwood, and you need Tulsi. And so in this manner, he started performing seva to these 12 Sheilas. So now let's shift to George Harrison and talk about some disappointments that he had to go through.
Prabhu,
Yes, Prabhuji.
sorry, can I
Yes,
interrupt you? Just one quick question.
yes.
What was the reason Gopal Bhatt Goswami said he doesn't want to worship any deities?
Because of this Aishwarya form, he didn't want to do that anymore. He just didn't want to take to deities worship at all, because he had, right from childhood, he has been seeing deities worshipped in the form of awe and reverence in that Aishwarya feature. He kind of decided to just renounce everything and not take it up.
Oh, and that was because he was attracted to Madhurya.
Yes, and he didn't want to, again, because he also felt that if he were to take up deity worship, these thoughts of Aishwarya feature would come back. And later on, we will see in this pastime that he does, in fact, get into a lot of deity worship in the Madhurya form. So I will mention that.
Okay, Prabhu. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next thing is, let's look at George. So George also grew up towards his teenage years, seeing a lot of failures. He met John and Paul, the other two Beatles, and they moved to Germany in search of success. They performed in nightclubs in Hamburg, Germany. They returned back exhausted, discouraged, and penniless. So I'll read an excerpt here very quickly. So this was after their trip to Germany. Okay. So here it was a long trip back to Liverpool, clutching a bag of apples and biscuits that Astrid had given him. George struggled under the weight of his amplifier, suitcase, and guitar. He arrived home on November 22nd, 1960, exhausted, discouraged, and penniless, having spent whatever money remained on train fares, porters' tips, and taxis. The others straggled back a few weeks later, just as broke and just as dispirited. I'll stop there. So, this was a huge failure for the Beatles initially. So, let's shift back to Gopal. So, a big turning point happened both in Gopal and George's life through rich people. So, in this one particular case, a rich merchant helped Gopal rekindle his desire to worship deities, and a rich businessman helped the Beatles rekindle their desire for material ambitions. So, a rich merchant showed up in Vrindavan. He gave all the saints in Vrindavan deity dresses, jewelry, and other paraphernalia that are used to worship deities. He also gave deity dresses to Gopal. But Gopal was disappointed. He thought, the Lord does not have any form in the Sheela form that I'm worshiping. How do I dress him? How nice it would be if this Sheela form had hands, had feet, and so on. So slowly he's getting the desire to do deity worship. Now it so happened that that particular day happened to be Narsimha Chaturthi festival also in Vrindavan. So Gopal, as he was reading the Srimad Bhagavatam 7th canto on the pastime of the appearance of Lord Nrsimhadev, he was thinking that if the Lord could emerge out of a pillar by the pointing of his dear devotee, Prahlad, why can't my Lord appear from one of these Sheelas? Thinking in this way, he covered each Sheela with a cloth and put them to sleep. So you can think about this like this is the Sheela, and then so this is the cloth. He covered them so that they could sleep, and this is what he would do every single night. And something miraculous happened the next morning. But before we go there, let's wait and see how a rich businessman helped George. So one rich merchant rekindled George's love for singing. Now, that businessman was Brian Epstein, who later became the future manager of the Beatles. How he found the Beatles is also very interesting. So, this Brian Epstein made his life by selling albums. One girl one day asked him for a song of the Beatles that they had sung in Germany. So, this Brian prided himself with all the records on the planet. He did some searching and found that the singers were not actually in Germany, but in Liverpool itself. So, he visited them and saw them singing at a club. His first impression on them was that they were not neat, they were not tidy, and they were even smoking in public. He made a quick offer of 25% agent fee, which the Beatles agreed. In fact, they had no other option at that time, so they happily agreed. So Brian tried a lot to get them a producer and a gig. And finally, they were called to record a song in EMI Studios in Abbey Road. They recorded the song called Love Me Do, which became an instant hit in the UK charts and was ranked 17th. This was the beginning of their success. And very soon, the picture that I'm showing you is the crowds that would gather just to take one glimpse of the Beatles. The momentum continued to build, and they reached the top of the material world. The only person who was even fairly close to their success at that time was Elvis Presley. But the success of the Beatles was way higher than Elvis Presley. I'll just mention a couple of instances of how big they were. So each concert that they would perform fetched them 50 million pounds in those days. That's equivalent to $250 million in today's terms. Also, another interesting and funny pastime that Radhanath Swami shares is that when they would stay in hotels, the hotel managers would take the towels that they used and cut them into small half-inch squares and sell each of those squares for $100 in those days. And this became a business, uh, a huge business of $100,000 in those days, just from the bodily sweat of the Beatles. Isn't that funny? And another thing is that they would always travel by private jet planes. So people would break the security barriers and just climb on top of the jet planes and holding each other's leg, and they would bend down just to catch one glimpse of the Beatles from the windows of the planes. And remember, George was just 22 years old at this time, and he was pushing against the limits of material success. I'll just share a few pictures from those times. So it was also called Beatlemania. The security guards were no match for the crowds. The crowds would always push through the security barriers and rush towards the Beatles. So this was in UK, America, and even in Australia. This second picture that I'm showing you here is from Australia. So they were huge. They were very, very famous. You can't even compare to anything right now who are that famous. No Bollywood actor, no Hollywood actor would even come close to the popularity of the Beatles. At this time, Shyam Sundar Prabhu was thinking, if only I can somehow reach to the Beatles and make them chant the Hare Krishna mantra, what an effect it would be, it would create. Also, George, out of the four Beatles, he was not happy. He wanted something higher. Something didn't feel right. All this success, all this wealth, in fact, sex, drugs, and rock and roll were at their fingertips. But he didn't get that satisfaction. He wanted something else, something higher. So he started on a spiritual quest. He first met Ravi Shankar. He went with Ravi Shankar to India. He learned the sitar. And for the first time, he understood or learned what yoga meant. He understood that yoga means to link or to connect with something supreme. After that, he met Vivekananda. He read Vivekananda's books. He read the autobiography of a yogi. After reading this book, he became fascinated by mystic powers. In fact, levitating, becoming invisible, living more than 200 years, these are the things that fascinated him. After that, he read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, wherein he focused on the 8 kinds of mystic powers. But luckily for him, all of these mystic powers did not seem very attractive at all. After all the material success that he had achieved, this mystic powers did not seem attractive at all. He concluded that mystic powers were also like LSD for him. So he said that it is like a drug which puts me in illusion and traps me. I want something higher and something more deeper than these mystic powers. That is where he was at. So now let's move back to Gopal. And if you remember where we had stopped at the pastime where Gopal Bhatta Goswami had covered the Shila with a cloth. And the next morning, when he woke up, he saw that one of the Shilas had expanded itself and it was still covered by cloth. That particular Shila was his favorite Damodar Shila. So he quickly took bath in the Yamuna river and returned. He removed the cloth and found the most beautiful form of Krishna. He was only 12 fingers long. So if you do 4 fingers like this, like how I'm showing you, 4 more and 4 more, that's the length of Radharamanji. Okay. So he was only 12 fingers long, but he had very beautiful and intricate features. And most importantly, he had a very beautiful smile, as you can see in the pictures here. Can you ever imagine the ecstasy of Gopal Bhatta Goswami at that point? Now, he was the youngest of the 6 Goswamis, and he immediately ran to all the other Goswamis to tell them what had just happened. Rupa Goswami came running there, and he said that this form of the Lord is very, very rare. He said that in Vrindavan, to know how Krishna's feet looks, one must take the darshan of Madan Gopalji, which was worshipped by Sanatan Goswami at that time. If one needs to know how Krishna's face looks, one must take the darshan of Govindji, worshipped by Rupa Goswami himself. And if one needs to see how Krishna's chest looks, then one must take the darshan of Gopinathji, worshipped by Madhu Pandit at that time. So Rupa Goswami mentioned that this form of Krishna had the feet of Madan Gopalji, had the face of Govindji, and had the chest of Gopinathji. Hence, he decided to call this most beautiful deity Radha Raman. What does, what does Radha Raman mean? Krishna who gives pleasure to Radharani. Another reason for naming him Radha Raman is that the spot where the deity appeared is the same spot as the Ras Leela. So as everyone was celebrating and enjoying the darshan, came the next challenge for Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So now let's shift back to George. So now the Lord appeared to Gopal, but the Lord also appeared to George, who was looking for something higher through the Mahamantra. So how did the Mahamantra appear to George? He did not meet any devotees, but this came in a very interesting way. After all the successes that the Beatles achieved, they decided to go on a vacation to Greece with the idea of purchasing a small island. They wanted to purchase a small island for themselves where they could stay together. So just before this trip, George bought an album of Srila Prabhupada chanting the Hare Krishna mantra called the Happening Album. You can Google this on YouTube. You'll find this album. It's called the Happening Album, which was released in 1966 in New York. So George got hold of this album and he started playing this album for the first time. before his trip to Greece. I'll just read an excerpt of what happened in Greece. So, sailing a smooth Aegean Sea under the brilliant clear sky, George and John perched on the prow of their boat, playing ukulele banjos and chanted Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. 6 hours we sang, George recalled. But we couldn't stop once we got going. As soon as we stopped, it was like the lights went out. It went on to the point where our jaws were aching, singing the mantra over and over and over and over and over. We felt exalted. It was a very happy time for us. So, this is how Krishna entered George's life through the holy names. And that was not it. George started taking shelter of the holy names whenever he could. So, especially in crisis situations. So, one example is when he was on a private jet flying out of San Francisco. So, George sat just behind the pilots. Shortly after taking off, the plane went into a nosedive. From his seat, George could see lights in the cockpit flashing, unsafe, unsafe. He started thinking, well, this is it, he thought, and started chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. And he also chanted Om, Christ, Om. He was just chanting loudly. So the Beatles press agent, Derek Taylor, who was sitting next to George, also started chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. After a few distressing moments, the plane pulled off its stall and landed safely in Monterey. Remember that until this moment, he had not even met the devotees. He goes on to say much later in his life that it was the mantra that saved him for only one main reason: to help spread the mantra all around the world. Isn't that amazing? So now, George finally met the devotees. As I was saying, Shyam Sundar was very eager to somehow meet the Beatles. But just as Shyam Sundar was eager to meet George, George was eager to meet the devotees too, because he had heard this mantra. Something about the mantra was capturing his heart, you know. And so once when Shyam Sundar in his white robes was waiting outside their home to catch a glimpse of the Beatles, George pulled him inside and instantly they connected. They talked for several hours. George also visited the devotees, sang kirtan with them for hours, and that connection only flourished, only increased. Whenever George was in distress, he sought the shelter of devotees. Okay. So a huge thing happened in 1969. In July of 1969, George invited the devotees to record the album called the Radha Krishna Temple. George decided to produce the album. He decided to pay for the whole thing. In August of 1969, Apple Records released the Hare Krishna mantra with no idea how the public would react to a Sanskrit prayer set to a rock drum beat. On the first day of its release, the record sold 70,000 copies, dear devotees. 70,000 copies were sold on the first day. Within 2 weeks, it rose to the #1 spot in the UK charts. If there is some time towards the end, I will play some snippets of the song, which made the whole world chant the Hare Krishna mantra. George later said that this one was one of the thrills of his life. And it was in this album that the Govinda song by Yamuna, which is played in all these ISKCON temples after darshan in the mornings, during darshan arti, actually. So it is, the Govinda song was actually recorded as part of this album, the Radha Krishna Temple album. Okay, we'll play that also if there's some time towards the end. So not just in UK, this Hare Krishna mantra continued to soar, climbing the charts in Holland, Germany, France, Sweden, reaching the number one slot as far as Yugoslavia, South Africa, Australia. Devotees found themselves signing autographs and posing for photographers. Here comes a prediction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which came true. Prithivite achayata nagaradi grama, sarvatra prachara haibe mora nama. In every town and village, the chanting of my name will be heard. So this is what is happening in George's life. Now let's move to the challenge that Gopal Bhatta Goswami had to face once the Lord appeared in Radharaman's form. So just as everyone was hearing and dancing to the Hare Krishna mantra, now let's see what happened in with regards to Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So he wanted to organize a big festival. A festival is also known as Utsav. Okay, he wanted to have a big festival of kirtans. He wanted to have a festival of Abhishek. He wanted to have a festival of a huge feast for devotees. But there was one big problem. The problem was that he had no money. He went to the local market bazaar in Vrindavan called Gopinath Bazaar, which still exists even today. He requested several merchants to lend him some money. He told each of them, just give me 15 days, I will repay all of you. After collecting the Lakshmi, he organized a huge festival. And this festival occurs every year, even today. It's called the Radharaman Prakat Utsav. Prakat means the appearance. Prakat Utsav. On the 14th day, he realized, this Gopal realized, that he had not gotten enough donations. That put him in a lot of anxiety. In fact, how would he repay the loans of everyone? He had a sleepless 14th night. With a sad face, the next morning, the 15th morning, he went to the first merchant, offering his obeisances and begged forgiveness. Please forgive me. I need 15 more days to repay you. The merchant jumped out, reacted by offering obeisances back, and said, what are you talking about? You came here just yesterday and gave me the entire amount loaned. Gopal Bhatta Goswami was surprised and shocked. He went to the next merchant and each of them said the same thing. He realized that Radha Ramanji had personally repaid the loan of everyone, disguising himself as Gopal Bhatta Goswami. He realized that day that Radha Ramanji fulfills the desires of his devotees. Till this day, there have been so many miracles in the lives of those who have taken shelter of Radha Ramanji. So now let's look at a challenge similar, which involves money in the case of the Beatles also. So in this pastime, Shyam Sundar Prabhu actually was put into anxiety and test. So Srila Prabhupada had the manuscript of the Krishna book ready in 1970, and he needed someone to publish it. The publisher, which was famous at that time, was Dai Nippon, and they required $19,000 for publishing 5,000 books. Now, $19,000 was a huge amount in those days. As Shyam Sundar was worrying what Srila Prabhupada would say next, Srila Prabhupada said, ask George if he can pay for the publishing. Shyam Sundar was very hesitant. He said, Swamiji, we must be very careful with George. We have never asked him anything so far. If he offers something on his own, we can then take it. Also, he has just offered us a brand new marble for the altar for $3,000. Srila Prabhupada was very insistent. He said, and this is there from in the Lilamrit, you may inform George that this is my personal request. You will see Krishna will help you to say it. That night, Shyam Sundar went to have dinner with George and his friend David, who offered him a very nice vegetarian meal. But somehow George was feeling very heavy, And it was also raining heavily outside. And everyone was having a nice time having dinner together. Suddenly, Shamsundar remembered his task at hand, and he realized that had to be now or never. So he immediately started saying, George, Srila Prabhupada asked me to ask you something. He took a deep breath and rushed ahead. He wants you to publish the Krishna book, $19,000 for 5,000 books. As he was saying this, he saw George's face start to change from happy-go-lucky dinner time friends to serious and then to anger. And Sham Sundar at that point starts thinking, oh, I've messed this thing up forever now. Suddenly, at that point, something amazing happened. A brilliant light flashes through the window. They hear a huge sound, kaboom! The house lights blazed hot and then they exploded. The house shook. A lightning had struck the roof of the house. The darkness continued for several long moments. It is mentioned that it was for 10 seconds, the darkness continued. And just as abruptly, the power returned. George said, there is no arguing with that, is there? And then he immediately agreed to print the books. So Shamsundar recalled, Srila Prabhupada said Krishna would help me, but that was a little too much. And they both laughed at Krishna's loving hand. Shamsundar that night was on top of the world. He realized that he had just pleased his spiritual master in a very big way and was grateful to Krishna for his loving hand in this pastime. So let's read about one more lovely exchange of Radha Ramanji's daily pastime. So this is a daily pastime that happens every day, even today. So this pastime is so first of all, some background. So Radha Ramanji never wears the same dress after wearing it once, right? So every day, the pujaris or the priests show the Lord about 17 or 18 dresses, and the Lord has to pick one of them. How does the Lord pick one dress? The Lord gives a smile as at the dress that he wants to wear for that particular day. Now, if you see these pictures of Radha Ramanji, you will find that in some pictures, you will see the teeth, like you see here, you will see the teeth of Radha Ramanji. So even today, every morning, Radha Ramanji gives a smile to the head pujari, telling that this is the dress I want to wear. So once, an old Brajavasi, an old lady, wanted to offer some very simple cloth as a dress for Radha Ramanji. Now the pujari saw that this was a very simple cloth with no borders, no design, and it was a white cloth. And he decided not to even show it to the Lord the next day because it was too simple. The Lord did not smile for any of the other 18 dresses that were shown to him. The pujari showed the cloth from the old lady, and immediately the Lord smiled. The pujari understood that the Lord sees the devotion and not the external dress. Just a couple more minutes and then we can conclude. So, Srila Prabhupada never forgot George. So also George Harrison not just published the Krishna book, but he also helped with purchasing the whole Bhaktivedanta Manor, the temple in London, right? So this is Srila Prabhupada's conversation in Mayapur in February 16th, 1977. This was a few months before Srila Prabhupada left the world. So when Bhaktivedanta Manor was donated, Srila Prabhupada said of George, because he has given shelter to Krishna by providing this temple, Krishna will surely provide shelter for him. Just before Srila Prabhupada left this world in 1977, he removed the ring on his right hand and said to his disciples around him, this is for George, give it to him. Amazing, isn't it? And also, on the other hand, George never forgot Srila Prabhupada also, and the Hare Krishna mantra. So several years later, he experienced a stabbing incident where he was stabbed 8 times by a thief who had entered his house. And while he was being stabbed, he kept chanting the mantra, the Hare Krishna mantra, loudly. And also, till the end, he had a picture of Srila Prabhupada on his altar. So finally, I just want to conclude by talking about the contributions that both of them made to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. There are so many incidences that I can mention, but I just want to be mindful of the time. So some contributions are, so through Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Mahaprabhu's mission continued through his many books, deity worship, and Radha Ramanji. In fact, Gopal Bhatta Goswami wrote the Sat Kriya Saradipika book. He edited the Hari Bhakti Vilas book, which was written by Sanatan Goswami. He wrote the introduction to Jiva Goswami's Sat Sandarbhas. He wrote a commentary to Bilva Mangal Thakur's Krishna Karnamrita, and he also wrote a book called the Samskara Deepika. So these were huge contributions that he made. And through George, as we heard, the holy names were spread all over the world. The Bhakti Vedanta manor was donated. So finally, I just want to conclude by saying, as the Gita explains, that we are all parts of the Lord, as is mentioned in 15:7 in Gita. And in his plan for the welfare of the world, we all have a part. Some of us may have bigger parts, others may have smaller parts. While playing our parts, some of us may meet with success, others with failure. Nevertheless, whatever be our part and fates, we will all be blessed and elevated by playing our parts. But to play our parts, we may need to sacrifice some of our desires. Even if such sacrifice is painful, it will make us sacred, purifying us of the negativities that cover the divinity of our souls. So I'll stop here